Next up is someone who finds inspiration literally in their own backyard. As both a graduate student at the University of Lethbridge pursuing her PhD in evolution and behavior, and as a visual artist, Leila Armstrong explores the intersection of wildlife with rural, suburban, and urban spaces, and she's going to literally show you what that looks like.
All right. I'm a graduate student at the University of Lethbridge, and over the past 8 months, I've been busily documenting urban wildlife within city limits. My project, Backyard Wilderness, involves being invited to install trail cameras in people's front and backyards to capture images of animals such as skunks, deer, rabbits, raccoons, porcupines, and a variety of bird species. One of the goals of my projects is to turn Lethbridgians into citizen scientists involved in mapping the variety of species with which we share our city. What animals are thriving in close proximity to us? Where are the densest populations of these urban dwellers? And perhaps most importantly, what do their movements through our backyards, parks, and alleys tell us not only about them, but about ourselves? A century ago, nature was seen as unpredictable, dangerous, and chaotic, and our shared goal was to go out there and tame it, map it, and exploit it for its natural resources. Increasingly, over the past 50 years, this campaign has been replaced by the need to protect and preserve. Nature is now seen as a pristine retreat, a virgin wilderness in need of our stewardship. In both cases, however, there is a shared perception that we exist outside of nature and act upon it. The aim of my PhD work is to pull this assumption apart. I worry there is a disconnect between people's day-to-day lived lives and their conception of nature as something external and removed. This leads to a concern that we will have no inclination for protecting the biodiversity with which we engage every day. Given that 81% of Canadians reside in urban centers, it is important to understand how city dwellers define and interact with urban wildlife. To help understand this relationship better, I've also been conducting an online survey asking people not only to describe what animals visit their yards and neighborhoods, but also how they feel about those visitors. Yeah, this is my favorite shot. Out of 1,082 respondents, 1,005 report that animals visit their yards and neighborhoods. The most reported animals in order of frequency are deer, skunks, rabbits, raccoons, and birds. And yet, although deer are the most reported, only 14 people out of over 1,000 respondents consider deer to be a problem. But it's not all good news. The second most reported animal is the skunk. 158 people report that skunks are a delinquent species. Now, that's only 15% of respondents, so obviously skunks aren't really that much of an issue. However, most of these people are basing their attitude towards skunks not on actual springs, but on their fear of potential springs, which I completely understand. But I think we have some education to do around specific animals. For example, skunks eat plants, grubs, and insects. They also eat creatures that we consider nuisances, like wasps, small rodents, and insect larvae that damage our gardens. Therefore, I would argue that skunks can make good neighbors and play an important role in the urban ecosystem. However, the point of this talk isn't to redeem the skunk, although it kind of in a little way is. I would argue that whether or not they are useful, they do have an inherent value. But we often fail to acknowledge that value unless the animal is majestic and stately or cute and Disney-esque. As a rule, it is only if animals remain within their supposedly natural habitats that we think they're okay. If they transgress those boundaries, they're pests, and like the skunk, potentially messy for us. But what is the natural habitat of a skunk or a raccoon? Well, let me introduce you to the concept of the synanthrope. We are familiar with the ideas of wild and domesticated animals, but what is a synanthrope? Synanthropes are animals that thrive in close proximity to us, but are beyond our control. They exist between the realms of the wild and the domesticated. They pick through our garbage, they eat the feces of our pets, they raid our bird feeders, and they dine on our tulips. They are our frequent neighbors, whether we like it or not. And they constantly remind us that humans are not separate from nature, which is clear when we recognize that we create these unique and diverse environments within our urban niche. environments in which certain animals thrive. So, to conclude, I would like to advocate for the transgressors and the adapters, the synanthropes. I also want people to consider what happens when we approach the everyday with a sense of discovery and wonder, the same attitude we regularly use to frame our encounters with wildlife outside of cities. My point is that, in a world with shrinking traditional wildernesses, we need to reconsider what the proper boundaries for wild animals are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leila. A unique perspective.